Order. Order. Well, good afternoon, colleagues, to this final meeting of 2025. Who would have thought it? And the ghost of Christmas present is amongst us in the form of the Right Honourable Darren Jones. And the ghost of Christmas past, played by Cat Little, is with us. And Luke Taylor will, of course, play the part of the ghost of Christmas future. I have little or no doubt. Anyway, I'm now going to end any form of Christmas-themed stuff. You're both very welcome, and thank you for finding the time to join the committee. So, let me turn to you, Mr. Jones. And I say Mr. Jones because I have a cornucopia of titles that I could use. I'm not quite sure whether I call you Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. Tell us about those roles, or particularly what is the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister?
Well, look, firstly, it's great to be with you. I think the first time since I was appointed in September.
Sorry, belated congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I should have said that at the start. Forgive me.
Look, they are two separate jobs. So the Prime Minister, over the summer recess, decided to create a ministerial role within Number 10. Now, Number 10 is not a department. It is, in fact, a business unit of the Cabinet Office, but as the committee will know, it functions as its own business unit. And he wanted additional ministerial capacity to help him with the day-to-day work of his priorities in the Number 10 building. So he created a Minister of State role, which at the start of September was an attending cabinet role. It was technically part of the Cabinet Office ministerial team, but it was specifically within Number 10, reporting directly to the Prime Minister. Then, of course, the reshuffle happened, and the Prime Minister asked me to become the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which obviously meant that I was then running the Cabinet Office and sat with full rank around the Cabinet table. So they're two separate roles. Functionally, though, they're all trying to do the same thing, which is to ensure that the system of government is focused on the Prime Minister's and the public's priorities, that we improve delivery and solve delivery problems where they exist, and that we better communicate with the public about what government is doing and show the difference we're making in their lives. In practice, that means that I tend to focus my time on policy issues, delivery issues, reform of the government communications service, and then I also have oversight of the National Security Secretariat and support the Prime Minister on those issues too. I spend broadly half my time whilst I'm in London in Number 10. I'm there every morning for the Prime Minister's daily briefing. I spend more of my time there on Mondays and Tuesdays with Cabinet. And then I spend the other half of my time in the Cabinet Office, which tends to be in the afternoon or evenings and a bit more back-ended into Wednesdays and Thursdays.
Okay. We have a Cabinet Secretary. The Prime Minister has a Chief of Staff. There is a Government Director of Communications. And we have a Deputy Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. And then we have you. Mm-hmm. This is quite a complicated Venn diagram of where does the buck stop. You have responsibility, some element of responsibility in the Cabinet Office for security, national security, which of course most people would automatically think was the purview of the Home Office. I think I'm right to say you have some role in foreign relations, which of course many people would say would be the purview of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Secretary. So is this not a recipe for, is it the creation of an office of the Prime Minister almost by the back door? And there are many of us who would actually welcome the creation of an office of Prime Minister. That's the first question. And the second question is, where is the buck going to stop with so many eyes on so many issues?
Sure. So just to break that down a little, I mean, the Cabinet Office has always served the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. That still happens. What we don't do is duplicate the work of departments. We are there in the centre to support departments with their delivery. So we don't try to deliver instead of them. We're there to add value as and when needed by departments or when the Prime Minister is engaged on a particular issue. In terms of the distinction between the roles, we essentially work together as a team. The Cabinet Secretary, alongside with Cat Little, obviously sit at the head of the civil service as the profession and ensure that officials are being tasked with doing the work that ministers are instructing them to do. The Chief of Staff is more of a political role, supporting the Prime Minister on political strategy. My role tends to focus on, as I say, policy and delivery, although I tend to be...
That's a new role for the Chief of Staff, surely, because there is a political director within Number 10 who does the politics. The Chief of Staff traditionally has done the driving forward of policy.
Well, so the Chief of Staff is the head of the units that do political work, including the political director and the communications functions. But as I say, I tend to work with not just the Chief of Staff, but the Deputy Chiefs of Staff as well, where we've broadly separated out political and communications strategy, policy and delivery, and private office and visits and events and stakeholders. But I essentially work alongside the Prime Minister across everything that he does, but the proportion of my time is predominantly on domestic policy and delivery issues.
When you speak with you speak effectively as if it was the Prime Minister speaking.
Yes.
And that's readily understood across Westminster and Whitehall.
Yes.
So does that mean, because I know this is something that Miss Little and this committee have discussed, which is the desire, if you will, the merit in the Cabinet Office being the sort of the banger of heads together to say, look, I don't really care if you're not particularly happy with this. This is what we've decided to do. Just damn well get on and do it. Stop the messing around. Just crack on. And if you don't like it, you can always resign, but just do it. And the system that we have, very siloed, Cabinet Secretaries of State, permanent secretaries effectively running their own mini empires under the broader umbrella. Are you being more muscular, and do you feel you've got the power to be more muscular in actually driving things forward to the point of delivery?
Yes. You also want to do that in the right way. The centre is quite small compared to all of the other departments with all of the experts that they have within their teams. As I say, the measurement of success for me is that we are adding value to enable and speed up delivery of the public's priorities and being able to communicate that. Now, there is a role for Secretaries of State to be involved in cross-governmental discussions. One of the changes the Prime Minister and I have made is to restructure the Cabinet subcommittees, which was published recently, to ensure that there is a space for those conversations to be had so that you don't end up in a position where lots of disagreements or disputes surface all the way up to either me or the Prime Minister, but get resolved more effectively downstream as you bring the whole of Cabinet with you on those questions.
Look, we'll come on to mission-led government in a moment, but you've mentioned twice the people's priorities.
Yeah.
What are they?
People want to feel better off at the end of this Parliament than at the start of it. They want to know that their public services, in particular the National Health Service, is fit for the future and there when they need it. And they want to feel pride in our country, whether that's in relation to communities or security of our border and those types of issues. So I think the public are very clear about what they want from government. It's our job to be able to show that government and democratic processes, quite frankly, are able to deliver on that promise of change in a really tangible way. And for me, that means that you take quicker policy decisions in government. You understand that delivery is different to policy. Whatever's written on a page in Whitehall doesn't mean anything to the public at home. Delivery on the ground is what matters to them. And then we reform the communications service, where we're completely losing the war at the moment in the new media landscape, to be able to prove to people that it is government intervention that is making a positive difference in their lives.
And how has HMD defined that is what, how have they discovered that is what the public want?
Well, we were elected on that mandate as the Labour Party. The Prime Minister's been very clear those are his priorities. And we know through testing and insight work and focus groups and feedback with people across the country that those are the headline issues, irrespective of your voting intention or demographic. Those are the broad general things that the public care about and expect to see progress on.
I would ask you whether that included the family farm tax, for example, but we won't get into the weeds of tax policy at this hearing. We could be here all day. John Lamont.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. Do you think the centre of government is operating effectively?
No, and it needs to change. It's not a criticism of the civil servants, it's a criticism of past decisions about how the centre operates. At Cabinet this morning, I was presenting the changes that the Prime Minister and I have been implementing in the centre of government as a reflection of our work over the last couple of months about why we think the centre is not working properly. If I kind of split it down into three diagnoses, one is we've not been prioritised enough across government. There's a lot of business as usual activity that happens in all departments, lots of things happening all of the time. We need to make sure the whole kind of muscle of government is focused on the public's priorities. The second, as I've just alluded to the Chair, is the system confuses often policy and delivery. Policy papers is one thing. I need to understand supply chain delivery objectives, what's actually happening on the ground. That involves, for example, making sure that we get coordinates from departments about where they're spending money and what's changing so that we can see what's happening in particular places and show that to the people in those areas. And the third thing is that we've got to be quicker. We're too slow, we're too focused on inputs and outputs, i.e. we've got to do something, let's have a process or a strategy or a review or work together. We're not focused enough on outcomes. And that's the thing we need to kind of push the system to be really, really clear about.
And since your appointment, do you think you've made as much progress as you would have liked in those areas?
Look, I mean, coming in September, if it was as easy as me just deciding what would happen and the whole thing would happen, that would have been great. But there's a lot to do. So I've had to prioritise my time and be clear about what I'm going to do. But it's a team sport, and then it's about bringing colleagues with you within departments, around the Cabinet table and elsewhere to make sure that we're all delivering against the same agenda, which is essentially what we were talking about at Cabinet this morning, and which will set the tone for 2026 as a year of delivery.
Okay. And presumably the Prime Minister and government, they're following a grid in the way that governments normally do. Is that something that you have ownership of and responsibility?
I have oversight of it as Chief Secretary in number 10, and there's a shared diagnosis, both with special advisors and with civil servants responsible for communications reform, that the system has become addicted to announcements. Just because we've got a grid doesn't mean we need to announce something else on a Tuesday because it's a Tuesday. We've got to be very focused on priorities. And one of the things that you'll see from us in the new year is, as we work through the changes, is a better approach to modern communications, better storytelling, not just with ministers, but with members of the public. And what I loosely refer to as delivery comms, which is showing that we're getting on with things as opposed to just announcing something else and adding it to the pile.
You mentioned a few times the need to improve communications, and I think that's one of your responsibilities. Can you give some examples of where you've made a clear difference to government communication?
Well, it's not just me. We've got Tim Allen, who's the Executive Director of Communications in number 10. We have David Dinsmore, who's the new Permanent Secretary for the Government Communications Service, who's housed within the Cabinet Office. One of the changes that the government has made, which has worked really well, which was courtesy of my predecessor, Pat McFadden, and one of the special advisors in number 10 at the time, was something called the New Media Unit. I often joke this is not new in the world, but it is new to government. It's essentially about how you communicate through digital platforms and social media channels, as opposed to just giving a press release to a newspaper in Westminster. It's a fairly small team. I think it's about 20 FTE. They've managed to bring some budgets together from across government, where government's chipped in with their communications budget to prove the model. And it's been much more effective at engagement and sentiment than traditional communications. So that is one aspect that's changed in the year we've gone through already. But there is much, much more for us to do. And what you will see as a consequence is the grid will change in its nature. The way we engage with the bubble versus the rest of the world or the rest of the country will change. And the content we produce on platforms and elsewhere will start to become more creative and more interesting, and we hope more engaging for the public.
There's been a few examples where communication hasn't been so good when you've been in charge. I'm thinking around the budget, the speech from the Chancellor and the briefing, and then the U-turns when the budget actually came, and then you had the briefing against the Health Secretary, West Street, the night before he went on the media round. Do you have any reflections as to what went wrong, and do you take responsibility for that?
Well, I can't take responsibility for everyone across the whole of government, so no, I don't. We have to respect the autonomy of departments. I think there's a coordinating role that we can enhance in the centre, where currently we don't do that. That is not about centralisation or taking budgets or power away from departments, but it's saying that by working together in this new media landscape, we can have a more positive impact in terms of engaging with their stakeholders and with the public. That's the work that we're going to be working with Cabinet on in 2026. Can I stop politicians or political advisors from chatting? No. Would I encourage them to do it less? Yes.
What action did you take after those incidents that I gave as examples in terms of trying to enforce that policy that you've just articulated?
All of that's in the public domain. The Prime Minister, I think at Liaison Committee yesterday, was clear that off the back of political briefings, he not only made it very clear that that's unacceptable, but he also changed some of the processes within Number 10 about who can speak to journalists officially on behalf of him and Number 10. That's essentially now just the Executive Director of Communications.
Do you police that? Are you responsible for that? I mean, that system the Prime Minister's now put in place, is that your baby, basically?
Well, it's an expectation of everybody in the building. Do I go around every day with a clipboard and ask, who have you spoken to last night? No, we wouldn't get anything else done in the job. But the Prime Minister's wishes are made clear. I think if anyone decides to go against that, there will have to be consequences for it. And then in respect of the leak in advance of the budget, I'm thinking in particular to the Financial Times, I think on the Thursday before the budget. Again, the Chancellor has given evidence to the Treasury Select Committee on that, and the Permanent Secretary is conducting a leak inquiry to understand where it might have come from and how, including, for example, how the named list process works. I'm particularly conscious there's still too much hard copy paperwork. I would much rather things were electronically presented on dashboards and screens where you can control access more effectively and know who looked at what when, as opposed to printing out A3 Excel spreadsheets, which we tend to do a lot around the budget. Too many people are on the named list, in my view. So there are kind of improvements that can be made where there's very sensitive information, which is often the case for national security material, but I think we can up our game on other economic security related matters as well.
And lastly for me, in relation to unauthorised briefings, there was a report in the New Statesman, I think back in November, suggesting that sources within Number 10 were suggesting that your appointment had not been a success. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yes, I disagree wholeheartedly.
But clearly the policy of clamping down in these briefings is not maybe working, or is not being policed as well as it could.
As I say, we can all give ourselves hundreds of KPIs. We have to focus on what's important to the public and make sure we're delivering against those.
Okay, thank you.
So you rightly said the new media unit, and there's nothing new in the new media that the new media unit is looking at. This question may sound harshly political. It's not intended to be. It is honestly seeking a frank and honest answer, which I know you're more than capable of giving. I think there'll be a lot of people who will be reflecting at this year end on the first full year of the first Labour government since 2010, and be scratching their heads and saying, it all just feels a little underprepared, as if their victory came as the most, scintillating surprise to them, and that no preparatory homework was done to prepare a programme for government, to think about how to communicate in the mid-2020s, etc. And there's a feel of sort of running to catch up, which in a 5-year parliamentary term, one doesn't have the luxury of. In all candor, is that a fair assessment? Has there been? I think Mr. McFadden sort of intimated when he appeared that just the change of how to do governance in the UK had changed, almost analog to digital between 2010 and 2024. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
I would say that any opposition party has limited resources. And when you're fighting a very significant set of elections, a lot of your resources tend to go into campaigning. And so it is hard for opposition parties of any colour to do the type of work that you can then do in government when you have the resources of the civil service available to you. So you have to be clear on what your political priorities are.
But you have people like Mr. Bell running important think tanks. You have the research facilities of trade unions on public policy, so on and so forth. You had the World and his wife offering a putative government advice. I accept the short money point, but oppositions aren't short of people giving advice. Good people.
Well, there's a difference between being able to conduct your own work and to receive advice from others. Think tanks play an important role, but I don't think they can be seen as a substitute for opposition parties compared to the civil service. I think there's just a natural gap, which I think is factually representative. Has government changed? When I talked to counterparts who were in government last time the Labour was in government, absolutely. One colleague described it to me as the system of Whitehall feels very similar. That's not changed very much, but the velocity of issues happening in the world has increased rapidly. And that's partly a reflection of the media and social media, how you're responding to issues every day. But it's also reflective of lots of the challenges that we face in the world. And look, there's lots of things that I'm proud of that this Labour government has achieved in its first 18 months, but there's no denying the fact that challenges in the world, geopolitically and in trade and all of those types of things, have very significant bearing on government. And it's right that when you're in government, you step up and respond to that, even if you couldn't have anticipated it in advance of the election for your manifesto.
We have I don't know what your school has, what you've done to upset your school to inflict PACAC on you this close to Christmas. I mean, if this is your school Christmas present, I'm sure there's some of the faces I saw at Liaison yesterday, aren't there? Were any of you at Liaison yesterday? No, must be a different school. Anyway, you are all very welcome in the now. It's a sellout, Darren.
You saw my name on the agenda.
They are. It's standing room only. They'll be selling ice cream and Kiora in just, that ages me, doesn't it, talking about Kiora. Lauren Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, Minister. I think it's fair to say probably for people outside, but even maybe for some people who are in Westminster, mission-led government is a little bit of a black box. How do you understand mission government, and is this still a mission-led government?
Mission-led government means two things to me. One, focusing on tackling long-term structural issues that the country faces, as opposed to what the Prime Minister in the campaign called kind of sticking plaster politics. And two, it means kind of making government work together, which might sound obvious, but as we've already alluded to via the Chair, every department is essentially constitutionally its own organisation with its own authority and own decision-making powers. So it's how you kind of bring them together. Are we still mission-led? Yes, insofar as the missions are still government policy and government priorities. Do the mission boards still meet? Can they convene across government? Absolutely, they do. I think what has changed is perhaps more of the internal wiring of mission boards. So we came into government giving mission boards the status of a cabinet subcommittee and thinking it may be effective as a delivery mechanism. What we ended up not doing was giving a mission board kind of equivalent status to a department, because that was in many ways too difficult to achieve in the first kind of 6 to 9 months. So mission boards have ended up becoming a very useful convening mechanism. They were very effective, in my view, in the spending review when I was Chief Secretary at the Treasury, and we allocated money against mission priorities. But in the end, the money went to government departments with accounting officers, permanent secretaries reporting to Parliament with secretaries of state. So it's policy, it's important, and you should think about the long term. But has it fundamentally changed the constitutional principles or the setup of government? No.
How often do these cabinet subcommittees meet? And can you provide an example where they have driven the kind of delivery that you were just talking about?
Well, one of the reasons I've changed them is because we weren't using them effectively enough. The structure that we'd inherited broadly from the previous government, they were quite wide-ranging. So we had a subcommittee, for example, called Home and Economic Affairs, which basically was anything that wasn't foreign policy or national security. And they were being used predominantly when there was a need to force a decision, when there was a disagreement across government, because they can use the collective authority of cabinet to make a decision. As a consequence of that, they weren't being used as a kind of business as usual vehicle for cross-government collaboration. That was kind of happening elsewhere. So we've changed the structure of those subcommittees to focus, as I said earlier, on the economy and public services and communities. But I've said to Cabinet that we want to use them more effectively next year to facilitate cross-departmental debate on strategy and policy and delivery, as well as on decisions when they need to come to that setting.
Do they meet on a monthly basis or less frequently?
So we're setting the agenda for the new the new cabinet select committees, forgive me, for January at the moment. The first meetings of the year next year will be about our priorities for 2026. There are quite a few committees, so my expectation is they'll probably meet every 4 to 6 weeks, but it might move a bit depending on prioritisation, availability and agenda items that need to be brought forward.
Thank you. Since taking office, the Prime Minister has said that successful mission government would require nothing less than the complete rewiring of the British state to deliver bold and ambitious long-term reform. From your earlier comment, it doesn't sound like too much progress has been made. What else do you think needs to happen, and what's your assessment of progress to date?
Look, I think there's probably quite a few chapters of a PhD under that title, to be honest, but to go to a few things that I've been particularly interested in. One I've started to talk about earlier was this conflation between policy and delivery, and being process-driven and not outcome-driven. We don't have as many delivery professionals in the civil service as we might have. I think I'm right in saying, but Kat, you should correct me if I'm wrong, that it's often been seen if you are ambitious and want to become a permanent secretary, you need to do lots of policy jobs, but not necessarily get in the weeds of infrastructure delivery or project management or IT transformation. I want to encourage more delivery experience, more innovation, more private sector expertise. Because the current system doesn't move quickly enough. This is the rewiring that the Prime Minister is talking about. And as I say, the system has, I think, historically thought about announcements, statements to Parliament, strategy documents, and all those things are important, but probably don't really care about any of that. And so being really clear about what outcomes matter, making sure you really understand if you're measuring an outcome, is it the type of measurement that a member of the public will say, it is that will make me feel better about whatever issues they care about? That focus has to be really important. But have I misrepresented delivery versus policy?
It depends what you mean by delivery. So about 56% of the civil service is in the profession that we call the operational delivery profession. They are the people on the front line serving citizens, delivering day-to-day public services. But I think what you're leading to is the very specialist, big programmatic skills that we have. And there is definitely a gap in our big infrastructure programs, the project managers who drive change. And I've discussed with this committee before some of the big deficits in transformation and digital skills, which, let's face it, everything that we are delivering has some element of technological underpinning. So there are some big gaps there that we have got to shift very, very quickly in the civil service.
And what does that mean, Minister, in terms of how departments engage with each other, particularly on, for instance, the 5 priorities that have been set out in mission-led government?
So, as I say, they played a very important role as mission boards in the spending review. So when I ran the spending review in the Treasury, departments make a submission and they come and see you in the Treasury and make the case. We also asked the mission boards to do that. So they made their own submission where they agreed across departments how they were prioritising different parts of the mission and bidding for money to do that. Even though the money then went to the department, it was on the understanding that that was essentially for mission delivery. That continues. It's different in different priority areas though. So if you take the elective waiting list, it's predominantly a DHSC responsibility. There are some equities in other departments, but it's predominantly within the one department. Compare that to, say, violence against women and girls. That's something where you need lots of departments working with each other in order to have the type of effect that you need to deliver.
Just sticking with the spending review, I think a lot of us noticed that explicit references to the mission were quite absent in the Chancellor's speech and in some of the accompanying documents. Is it your position that things were happening sort of behind the scenes, but the government hasn't been particularly good at articulating how that's come out in processes like the spending review?
You mean the speech she gave at the time of the spending review last year? Yeah. I can't remember what was in the speech, to be frank, because I'd have to check. But look, the allocations that went to departments were clearly labelled mission bids if they came in as a mission bid. And so you end up producing what's called a settlement letter for each department that ends up being quite long. Some areas of spend are ring-fenced and they can only spend it on those particular issues. They have reporting requirements against other types of spend. So mission delivery was embedded in that process and it was embedded in the settlement. I think from memory, we did talk about it in the spending review document that came to Parliament, but whether it featured prominently enough or not in the speech, I'd have to go back and check.
Thank you. We've talked about the 5 missions, but the government has subsequently also announced 6 milestones and 3 foundations, as well as quite a few targets.
Is there a partridge in a pear tree as well, or is it?
Well, yeah, indeed. I don't necessarily know, even as a Labour MP, if I could name the vast majority of them.
Let's see if
being
Mr.
completely
Jones
transparent.
Mr. Jones, what are they?
Well, look, I will go through them. I mean, the way I would articulate them is there are foundations like national security, border security, or economic security, that are stability, forgive me, that are obviously important to the country, irrespective of who's in government, and the public expect us to get that right. That's why they are foundational. Milestones were about things we could deliver early in the Parliament. One of them, for example, was 2 million extra appointments in the NHS, which I'm sure everyone's heard the Prime Minister say we've not just delivered, we've gone above and got to 5 million. Other issues, starting breakfast club rollout, thinking about teacher recruitment, setting up GB Energy, more community police officers in our street. They're kind of delivery milestones over the course of the Parliament. And then the plan for change kind of metrics, which embody what missions mean and hold us to account for that, is what happens over the course of the Parliament. So are you better off? Is the NHS performing better? So on. And so are you on the track to clean power by 2030? I can see why labelling different things might make it seem confusing. It's essentially a framework for government, and it's our job as politicians to then articulate the kind of destination story of where the country's going to as a consequence of all of the things that we've set out being delivered.
Do you think government's doing a good job of setting out that narrative?
I think we are. Could we do better? Yes, I think so. I think you'll see a new approach in 2026 to some of that, because some of these things take time to deliver. It's understandable why the public are eager for change, and we can't just say, well, it's going to take a long time and it's quite difficult. We've got to be able to show the stepping stones we're walking on to get from A to B. But evidently, we need to do more of that more effectively, given public sentiment at the moment.
And in terms of those additional sort of KPIs for government, why in particular do you think those were needed? And are you confident that they're all complementary?
I think they're needed because they, as I alluded to earlier, government does a million different things every day. There are always problems, there are always priorities. You know, there are lots of ministers who have their own interests and so on and so forth. And you've got to be clear with the whole system. You know, day to day is fine, but these are the things the government's accountable for, and you've all got to be accountable against that. And KPIs are important from the delivery unit perspective because it's something that you can track and hold people to account against. And if you're going off course, it enables you to have a conversation to try to understand why and what you can do to fix that. Are they complementary? I mean, insofar as they measure against the public's concerns as they articulate them themselves, yes. But are they interdependent on each other? Not necessarily.
You give a lot of thought, for instance, for how maybe some of the targets around immigration might have an adverse impact on economic growth, for example.
Which targets? Do you mean legal migration and the occupation shortage list and those sorts of things? Look, the public were clear they wanted migration to fall. There were in some areas, I mean, remarkably, I thought, in the occupation shortage list, a tendency for employers to recruit overseas in things like engineering and science and technology jobs, where you'd want to make sure you were doing everything possible to create those opportunities for young people being educated in the UK to have good careers in those spaces. So there was clearly something that misaligned around training, apprenticeships, access to work, and it maybe being just a bit easier to hire someone in overseas to do that work for you. When we think about opportunities for young people, we've got a pretty big problem on young people coming out of mandatory education and not being in work at the moment. That's why the Work and Pension Secretary is bringing forward the Youth Guarantee. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can possible to create those conditions for people in the country.
Final question from me. Just reference to the Chair's earlier comments around preparation for government. Obviously, mission-led government is a very relatively new idea. You've got hundreds of years of sort of siloed departmental approaches and that culture within the civil service. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think that you were prepared for the scale of that challenge going into government, or do you think that you got it about right?
Look, I think implementing change in Whitehall is hard because they are, in a very British way, structured around constitutional principles that aren't really written down anywhere. I could go on to a diatribe about how it was the sinking of the Belgrano that led to the structures that we have, and it's all a bit mad that that's the basis for how we structure government, but maybe I'll do that another time, unless you invite me to do so. And I can write to the committee afterwards about it. Yes, very good, very good.
I'm waiting for the musical.
Very good, me too. So how you modernise the state is hard. But I think there are many of us, including me, who would call ourselves modernisers, that the public expect us to get this right and to take it seriously and to be radical about it. And we'll be making some further announcements on these types of issues in the new year.
Are you confident that by the end of the 5-year term, presuming it goes that long, that you will have made those changes, those big changes to the way the civil service operates that delivers that mission-led approach?
We definitely will have made progress. Will the state be in the form that I would like it to be in by the end of 5 years? No, it's a longer-term project.
Before anybody winces, I'm just going to invite you to take out your thermometer.
Do you have one?
Well, take out your metaphorical thermometer. What is the temperature of the civil service bathwater at the end of 2025?
I think I understand the question, Chair. Forgive me. Could you try?
The Prime Minister, quite early in his premiership, described his frustration that the civil service was sitting in a tepid bath of sort of, well, it's neither too, it's sort of the Goldilocks porridge bit. It was all right, but it wasn't frightfully hot and it wasn't frightfully cold, but it didn't exactly move people forward.
Right.
Is this a boiling frogs?
This is the boiling frog, I think. So, are you heating up the water? Are you waiting to see them twitch?
Forgive me for laughing. To extend the metaphor,
yes,
I would rather say...
I approve of extending the metaphor.
I would rather quick showers and get on with the job as opposed to any suggestion of baths for anyone, quite frankly.
Are these hot showers, tepid or cold?
Whatever gets people moving, I don't particularly mind.
That was a diplomatic answer if ever there was one. Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. That was a very good answer.
Thank you.
Enjoyed that. So, just to kind of loop back on the previous section, and I thought I understood this. I did my homework, and we had, and forgive me, 5 missions from the manifesto from back in the day, legacy missions as they were. We then had an extra one, which was the foundations. Foundations gave us national security, secure borders, economic stability, and 6 milestones to measure how well we'd progressed over the first Parliament to deliver them, with 6 first steps broadly that grouped them. And I think you confused me when you were explaining shortly previously, but all of that kind of sits under Mission Delivery Unit, was our understanding from our previous session.
Yes.
We understand that that's been closed. Is that the case?
Yes.
Was it? Can you give us an explanation of how that came to be?
Well, the first thing I should put on the record is my thanks to all of the officials from across government that worked in the Mission Delivery Unit, or MDU as it was referred to. They put a lot of energy into setting up that team. I think the observation, though, and this is a failing of us as collectively as politicians, I think, as opposed to the officials, was that it ended up becoming a bit of a PowerPoint presentation-driven set of updates for ministers, which is fine in and of itself, but it doesn't actually improve delivery, and you spend a lot of time looking at graphs of things going ideally, well, most of the time up or down, depending on what it was. and not focusing enough on what is the problem, how do you fix it, move on to the next problem, how do you fix it, go. And the other problem, of course, was that MDU was in the Cabinet Office and it wasn't integrated into the number 10 team, which I think is important. And so the new delivery unit is essentially an integrated team between number 10 and the Cabinet Office working together. And the important thing to try to understand with the delivery unit and why it's different to policy is the policy unit deals with lots of things coming in every day. There's a disagreement on this, there's a problem with this, something's gone wrong over here. How do we advise the Prime Minister to respond to that? The kind of day-to-day business. The delivery unit has to focus on those longer-term outcomes for people across the course of the Parliament, and making sure that if you're off track, you're able to hold people to account, bring together the right people to fix the problem and get back on track. Not being distracted by the day-to-day, but focused on those core priorities. And that's how the number 10 delivery unit is now going to operate. The Cabinet Office is part of that. The particular thing that we add is if there's a problem somewhere that needs extra support, it might be procurement expertise, commercial contracts expertise, HR, property, it might be a relaxation of certain rules so you can make decisions more effectively for a particular priority. We kind of surge in the support around that to fix a problem and then to crack on. So the delivery unit still exists, but it's taken a more outcomes focused setup as opposed to just an accountability and performance management function.
So, and forgive me for trying to play that back, you, rather than looking at the progress of the steps that are being taken to achieve your milestones, that's now back up at the mission level to broadly test the temperature of the culture of the team working, rather than checking how many of the 6,500 new teachers you've delivered.
We in the centre shouldn't think of ourselves like Ofsted, in my view. We shouldn't be going around every department and saying, you, Department X, have said you're going to deliver these 100 things this year, and I'm going to check on all of those 100 things. The reason I say that is because the Secretary of State is accountable for that. They're accountable to the Prime Minister and Cabinet and to Parliament for it. They don't need us coming in and checking against all of it. What we're supposed to do is where something is a PM priority, and therefore a public priority, if there's a problem, then we should come in to try to help fix it and add value to what the department is delivering, because ultimately delivery comes through the departments, not through the centre of government.
Okay, and I guess to evolve the question then, in terms of parliamentary scrutiny, does that then, I mean, obviously parliamentary scrutiny is on the old-fashioned departmental level. When we're trying to align that with the first steps, the milestones, the foundations, or the overall delivery of the missions, does the changes made, or does the structure at the moment preclude, does it make that scrutiny more difficult, or does it actually give, is it really about the way that the Cabinet Office can sit across and provide answers, provide responses, provide information that is more reliable?
Yeah, I don't think it changes the accountability arrangements. Because missions never became their own, as I say, quasi-departments, it was always the existing departments that were accountable to their select committees in Parliament for their performance. That's not changed.
Okay. Moving on slightly onto mission boards. You referred to them in one of the previous answers. How active have they been across the piece up to this point?
As far as I can tell, they've been very active in the first 18 months. I don't have the actual statistics on numbers of meetings to hand. They were very busy in and around the spending review, predominantly because I asked them to come together and agree some priorities and to pitch them. And then they periodically come together to have updates on performance around the metrics that they've signed up to deliver. They are chaired, though, by the mission leads, and so it's up to the mission leads to decide to convene those boards. And as I say, that's a bit different in different areas. So health, because it's largely delivered within their own department, they don't need to convene a meeting to ask themselves the question, whereas VORG or some of the other economic growth, for example, they do involve other departments, and so they tend to meet more frequently on that cross-departmental basis.
Okay, and just to use the NHS as the example of the board, of the mission board, you have so the mission is build an NHS fit for the future. The mission board there seems relatively straightforward on the interpretation or how that's delivered through the milestones and the first steps. Has that duplicated, or has it? What in addition to the departmental governance has that provided? Is it, for the examples you gave during the budgeting round, during the spending review, that it gave more impetus to that, or that it had additional expertise that it could apply to the departmental structures?
So I think both, and I'll just flesh that out a bit. I mean, this may sound obvious from a former Chief Secretary at the Treasury, but everything is in the spending. If a department doesn't have money to do something, it's unlikely it's going to be able to do it that well, unless they change prioritisation of the budget. So the spending review process is super important for setting expectations and giving money to things to happen. So the mission boards, as they were very active around that, and the settlement letters are very clear about what was mission delivery. That's important in an individual department because they're very clear about what they're being expected to deliver against the spending settlement they've been given. But it's also really important when a department relies on another department to do something to help them. An example might be the role that healthcare professionals play in DHSC in helping children have the best start in life, for example. DfE can't direct public health or NHS officials to do something the DfE wants to do, but the Health Secretary can. And so where they come to an agreement on that, it brings that together and focuses on the outcome. That's where that's really added value.
Has the composition of those boards changed since in the inception? And if so, how?
The ministerial members are the same. They will often, though, bring in external people for particular questions or subject matters, and so external contributions change depending on the issue they're talking about.
And the final question of my piece, I think there's a general agreement, there's very little public understanding of this process, and whilst it's not necessary that you have a column every week in a broadsheet newspaper explaining what the vision boards have been doing, has it been a mistake not to give more detailed explanation of how the sausage is being made?
I don't think so. I don't think the public really care how we structure ourselves in government. They just want to know that they're getting good value for their taxes and that we're delivering the type of country they want to live in. I think they elect us and they elect a government to get on and do the business without knowing what's on the agenda of a particular mission board. I'm sure there's an audience for it, including this committee quite rightly and others. So if we need to explain to our stakeholders more effectively, we should do that. But for the general public, I think they rightly hold us to account for the changes they experience in their lives. And to go back to my earlier point, I don't want people spending too much time thinking about internal processes, strategies, meetings. I want them focused on real change for people across the country.
Thank you. Mr. Carling.
Thank you very much. So I've got some questions around civil service workforce mostly. Starting just with this. So the spending review included cuts of 16% to administrative budgets across government by, I think it was 2030. What reduction in civil service headcount is that likely to entail? Sort of how many civil servants are we looking at having by the end of that period?
I'll let Kat come in on the specific numbers. Just on the kind of politics of it, as I'm sure you all know, there's a difference between administrative budgets, as in kind of policy and central departmental officials, compared to programme delivery, which might be running a job centre or a prison or a hospital. So the reason we focused on admin budgets was because we don't want to cut frontline capacity for public users, but we want to ensure we're being as efficient as possible in the back end, which is partly around digital transformation, how we structure ourselves in government. But there are some implications where it has impact on the total number. So we've had to hire additional officials into HMRC and DWP to tackle fraud and error, which is why you see a growth in some of those areas compared to efficiency gains in other parts of the civil service. But on the particular numbers, I'll hand over to Kat.
So as this committee knows, we're currently producing our first ever strategic workforce plan going out to 2030 for the civil service. And the 16%, very importantly, is a reduction in the cost, the administrative cost. That is, of course, not just about people. It is about estates. It's about all of our corporate services and the overall on-cost of the civil service. So as we produce the strategic workforce plan, we will be setting out what that administrative cost impact has, where there are FTE reductions associated with it, but we're not yet at the point where we have all of the detail underneath it. And that's because we're in the middle of the business planning round for the whole of government. So the SR sets the top-down budgets. We translate that into detailed plans. So I'll be able to answer your question much more accurately with FTE once we publish the strategic workforce plan for the civil service.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and obviously it's useful to recognise, as it doesn't always happen, the fact that a lot of those savings don't necessarily come from headcount reduction, so it's useful to have that point on the record. You've anticipated my next set of questions about the strategic workforce plan. So I think we were originally told that that plan will be published alongside the spending review, and then sort of it was delayed until later this year, and we still haven't had it. I just wonder if you could outline why it wasn't published alongside the spending review.
So, very simply, we have to do further work to take budgets into action, and that takes a little bit of time. So the normal process is SR sets multi-year spending envelopes. We then allocate that money at much more detailed level across the whole of government. We're right in the middle of that process. So the government committed in the budget to publish that strategic workforce plan at the end of that planning cycle, which we would expect to conclude by the end of the financial period, and then there'll be a decision for ministers to make as to what period we want to actually publish the information for. But we would expect that to be in the public domain over the course of the next 3 to 6 months.
Right. Okay, that again, this is my next question very helpfully around sort of when will it be published. I mean, entirely fair answer, very much respect that. Though I guess that then does create a question around why was there then an expectation created that it would be published alongside the spending review in the first place?
So when we originally started doing the strategic workforce plan, and remember this is the first time we've ever tried to do it for a workforce of this size, we were hoping to be able to set out quite simply the overall shape and size of the civil service. As this committee will know better than any other committee, when we've got into the detail of the questions about what skills we need, where those people need to be located, the deficits that we've got to make up in the sort of shape and size of what we do, it became very clear that this was a much more complicated exercise. So obviously we don't ever want to mislead Parliament or the public, but we think it's right that this is a robust exercise that stands up to scrutiny and importantly is actually useful in delivering change and transformation for the government and our effectiveness.
Sure, thank you. I think it's also worth just bearing in mind that we're seeing voluntary and compulsory exit schemes across departments already kind of coming online. And there's a question around when we don't have that strategic workforce plan, how are decisions being made at this stage around who can sort of be let go under those schemes versus who should be kept?
So first off, quite a lot. There are 36 at the latest count voluntary exit schemes underway across government. We need to reduce the size of the civil service, and we have got clear direction under government policy to do that in administrative back office functions so that we can protect vital frontline citizen services. So under that direction, to meet our budgets over the course of the next 2 years, that work is already underway. It's important that we protect digital skills and we protect some of the services that we know are absolutely vital to our ability to deliver priorities. That work is happening at departmental level, and then the Cabinet Office oversees all of the voluntary exit schemes to work with departments to make sure that where cuts are being made, we understand how they're being made and also what sort of skills are being retained as a result of those programmes.
Thank you, that's helpful. That comes on to what I was about to say, but I'll ask the question I had planned anyway, just in case you want to add anything. What measures are in place across government just to make sure that we're not seeing lots of senior officials who develop lots of expertise over time, who will be in a lot of demand as a result of that, taking advantage of those schemes and thereby causing quite a loss of experience and expertise from the civil service?
So every department can design their voluntary exit scheme in a way that's relevant to their business. If I take the Cabinet Office, we've just concluded a very large voluntary exit scheme. We stipulated the skills and the levels of performance for people who would and wouldn't be eligible for that scheme. So we very specifically said if you are a digital expert, if you are delivering work that is a government priority, if you are categorised as a high performer in our performance management framework, then you are not eligible for that voluntary exit scheme. And every department will have their own version of how they run the schemes to protect skills and to protect priorities depending on the business that they operate.
That's helpful. And then just finally on this topic, before I move on to something else briefly, is there a sense of how many voluntary exits and sort of voluntary and compulsory redundancies we've had through these schemes, particularly this year in 2025?
Yes, so of those 36 schemes, we are forecasting around 5,000 exits from the civil service by the end of March 2026.
That's
really and I'm not, in terms of compulsory exits, the process in accordance with the civil service compensation scheme guidance is that you obviously have to go through a voluntary exit process before anyone can be considered for compulsory exit. So at the end of the financial period, we'll come back to whether that has been the case.
I would just add on this as well, if I may, that it's right to question the size and the cost of the civil service, but the more important question for me is the productivity of the state. So it's fine reducing headcount and reducing cost because you have to live within our means and there's difficult economic circumstances we're operating under, but we have got to shift productivity, which is really about skills and training and digital transformation, thinking about what we do in London, what we do in other parts of the country. And so there's a kind of bigger picture here, which I think is more of the prize that the public will expect us to try to secure.
Thank you, that's helpful. So just another question perhaps for yourself, Minister. In April, your predecessor, Pat McFadden, announced a review and rationalisation of arm's-length bodies, and this committee is doing quite a lot of work on various arm's-length bodies at the moment. At Liaison Committee yesterday, I noticed the Prime Minister used some quite interesting phrasing, and I'm going to quote him on this. He referred to the arm's-length body landscape as creating a sort of thicket of reasons you can't do anything, rather than a clear path through at speed. So, bearing that in mind, is that review of arm's-length bodies still a priority?
Yes, it is. I suspect the Prime Minister was talking about more than just ALBs in his comment. I think there's a whole plethora of things that we end up doing, sometimes because we have to by law, which is fine, but a lot of the time because we just do things in that way, and I'm not entirely convinced that we have to do that. There's a lot.
Just to clarify, because I was at Liaison, he was talking about ALBs, regulation, and the obsession with consultation.
Yes. Yes, and I obviously agree with the Prime Minister, but I do agree with him because often when you're trying to do something, the immediate response is, you're going to need a bill, it's going to be big, it's going to cost a lot of money, you need to consult. And look, it's important that you consult stakeholders, you manage legal risk and you do things properly. But the Prime Minister's view, which I say is right, is that I think we probably gold plate it too much sometimes, and the process slows us down to getting to the outcome that the public are expecting us to deliver. ALB reform is still important to the government. We've made a number of announcements in the first 18 months as well, including on NHS England and Ofwat and others. There'll be more announcements coming next year. And also, I think there's a piece for us to do in the Cabinet Office where we're making changes to the centre of government, where we are keeping an ALB. The ALB should be seen as part of the machinery of government and should come on that journey with us and not be operating in a different way. And that's especially important on things like back office IT systems, digital transformation, productivity requirements, and those types of things.
That's useful, and I'm glad you've just made that comment at the end there, because in a lot of our work with ALBs, we've had a lot of sort of discussion around the balance between accountability versus independence. Mm-hmm. So it's good to just hear that that's the way the government's thinking of it, is kind of very much on those systems levels. So just finally then, still a priority to review those ALBs. We've been made aware that there's only 3 people in the Cabinet Office now in the public bodies team. Is that really enough to be supporting that priority?
I don't know if the number is right or not, but Kat might know. The key thing is that the ALBs are the department's ALBs. So as you saw with NHS England, it's a DHSC-led process because that's their responsibility. Ofwat is a DEFRA-led process. So I wouldn't just look at the coordinating role that we play in the centre, but look at what capacity is being put into play across departments.
So we do have a very small public body unit, I think 3. I will double check if that is absolutely right. That doesn't seem at odds with my understanding of the size of that team. It's a very specialist small coordination team, and we work very closely with sponsorship bodies within government departments. As the Minister just said, ultimately the majority of ALBs have sponsor teams who understand the complex frameworks and reasons why they're established. I don't think we should be there to man-mark and check everything that those sponsorship teams are doing. So I certainly feel that we're able to do the work that we need to do to run the review, and we've made lots of progress working with departments collaboratively to make progress.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Can we just return to the Prime Minister's thicket?
Yes.
Your predecessor was very keen to say that he wanted to encourage a greater appetite for risk amongst the civil service, which also included learning lessons from failure as an iterative process, and not to put off taking decisions for fear of something not working out quite as intended. Is that still a motivational force from Cabinet Office? Because I think, speaking to, a lot of the answers that you've given, and probably at the base of a lot of the questions that we've asked, and that we will all hear in our inboxes and surgeries and so on and so forth with constituents, is we don't want to see how the sausage is made. We just want to see some stuff. We want to see some stuff delivered. And sometimes it's the fear of the failure, it's we've got to consult, there could be a judicial review. Not taking a decision saves my career rather than taking, albeit in good faith, the wrong decision. Mm-hmm. How do you personally, how does one instill across the whole army of the civil service effectively, and to ministers, just get on with it. Just do something. Deliver something. Show people that you're interested in doing stuff, rather than strategies, reviews, papers, plans, etc., which, as you say, doesn't actually deliver anything meaningful for citizens across the country. Mm.
So my sense is it is still a political priority for the government. Kat should tell me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that where ministers are saying to the system, I as the minister am telling you to take these risks and I am accountable for them, that works, and civil servants will respond to your requests and maybe do things in a different way. If you take a particular task force approach, for example, to trying to speed things up, that can work. Do I, though, think we've built a culture in the civil service with the right incentive structure that makes people think innovatively as opposed to maybe worrying about traditional legal, political or accounting risk? I don't think we have yet. I think there's definitely more we can do about that. And I think there's something in there around performance management, bonus schemes, promotion type opportunities, which are anchored in, I think, innovation and delivery experience, which one assumes means you rather take some risks in order to make a difference. But I don't know if you...
And so, just before you leave that, is there therefore any merit in having a more uniform template for that across the whole of government, rather than this very individualistic, departmental silo approach to what good looks like, what is defined as being risk, how do you reward it, how whatever. Particularly if you are serious, collectively serious about delivering cross-silo, mission-led stuff, this differential between each department surely ties one hand behind your back before you even get into the ring.
It does. It also reflects the fact to go back to our constitutional principles, that each government department is their own employer with their own hierarchy and organisational structure. So we can provide guidance, we can take collective decision making to implement that, but it is ultimately still done on an employer by employer basis across the different departments in government.
I know that, but is that fit for purpose today?
Oh, no, I don't think so, but changing it's very hard.
Well, maybe, but is there an appetite to have a go?
I've always got an appetite to have a go at these things. And we've been looking at some application of this kind of argument in different areas, and so we'll be saying a bit more about that in 2026. But it's something that I think probably you can't just do a big bang reform in one go. It's something where you've got to bring colleagues with you.
Where do you see the main force of resistance? Is it Secretaries of State saying, look, Darren, get your tractors off my lawn? Is it civil service? Is it the unions? Who could be the logjammer?
Well, we've not pushed it that hard yet, so I can't tell you for sure. I mean, look, change is difficult for people. Departments, no doubt, will enjoy their autonomy and will want to protect that. And there's some argument for that. You wouldn't want to completely undermine it. And I suspect if there was any process of change in that direction, of course, the trade unions would be a really important partner in that because of what it might mean for terms and conditions and employment status and all those types of things.
But you can maintain policy autonomy, can you not? But the rewarding of good or the rewarding of excellent, whether it's in the Ministry of Defence or the Department for Education, should broadly be the same because it's one government with collective responsibility.
Yeah.
Could I perhaps flesh out some of that? So it really matters that there is clear political and senior official direction to say it's okay to take risk. We are empowering you to innovate, to try some things and to learn from it. And it's all right if it doesn't go 100% to plan because we will learn and we will make sure that next time we go back in and try something, it's better. That needs to happen more consistently as a leadership mindset across the whole of government. And I don't think it's happening consistently enough. So some of the things that we're working on are how do you scale models of delivery, whether that's through task forces, whether it's through programs, through experimental test, learn and grow ways of working, to try and get some case studies and examples to show people it's okay. And if I might say, the performance management for good is not the issue. It's what happens when you get things wrong. So we need to make it okay to get things wrong. As long as we learn and we do the lessons learned, we scale it, we share it and we get on with it. And I do think people are scared of saying, I tried something that was out of the risk appetite that we would normally take and I failed to deliver the thing that you told me to deliver. So we need to reward the heroes who every single day are walking towards difficult problems and are getting up every single day to try and make things better and not always succeeding. Okay. So the performance management structure for the civil service has got to do that more consistently.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll obviously monitor that and look forward to seeing further progress over the next quarter or so. Let's turn to Richard Baker.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good afternoon, Dan. Good afternoon, Kat. As we approach the festive season, naturally our thoughts turn to outcome delivery plans. Could I, the young people will be kicking themselves at this, Chair. We've discussed this before, Kat, at the committee in terms of outcome delivery plan being used for the Cabinet Office. Are they still being used across government, can I ask?
In simple terms, yes, and we are evolving them. So, as the Minister alluded to earlier, the bits that are going to stay the same are adding value, citizen-centric outcomes coming first in the way in which we use taxpayers' money, and the very basic principles of you should have a plan, you should stick to it, and you should be able to articulate how you've used taxpayers' funds to deliver the outcomes that you have said you will deliver. So all of those features will stay the same. We're now rebadging them as strategic plans for departments, and every department will be required to produce a strategic plan. In the budget, we committed to those plans being published in the spring, starting from spring 2026.
So not being published at the moment, but it will be from next spring.
And that's merely a function of the cycle because we need to set out our plans for 2026, 27, which is the first year of the spending review.
And why was it thought to move, it would be right to move away from the the outcome delivery plans to a more strategic documents?
Because the system was rubbish, basically, in my view. I mean, look, the ODPs were set up by Gordon Brown when he was in the Treasury. They played an important role, but they became very manual and technocratic. What is it? It's essentially an Excel spreadsheet that permanent secretaries fill out and submit to the Treasury to say what they're delivering against their spending review settlement. When I was at the Treasury, I was not satisfied that that data was rich enough or being used well enough to inform decision making or to spot problems earlier on before they became big problems. The other thing I was also not satisfied with at the Treasury was that we burdened departments with ring fences and compliance reporting and all of these types of things, and they were spending far too much time having to deal with that as opposed to actually getting on with the job. So one of the things I've started at the Treasury, which is now being implemented with James Murray as my successor, is a reset of that relationship between the Treasury and departments. Departments are being given more autonomy to make decisions without constantly having to get Treasury approval up to a certain delegated level of spending. But in return, we expect more real-time access to day-to-day spending and performance data so that we can spot problems earlier through better IT systems as opposed to waiting for an Excel spreadsheet that has been written but doesn't really tell us very much.
These will be quite different documents then from the old ODPs in terms of they won't simply be a spreadsheet, but it's much more ambitious in terms of setting out strategy and delivery.
Yeah, they're called a strategy document for a reason. It will be about strategic outcomes against spending. But with time, we are integrating finance systems across Whitehall so that we can actually share near real-time data, which will replace the manual Excel spreadsheet system that we'd inherited from the last Labour government.
These will be published in spring, but from what you're saying, Darren, that the system there'll be far more, as you're saying, real-time, ongoing dialogue between Treasury and departments to ensure that there's delivery, but also departments have got the right kind of flexibility as well to achieve their goals.
Exactly right.
That's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just moving on to digital ID, because Liberal Democrats like to talk about that sort of thing. Why are you the Minister responsible for the digital ID project?
Well, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology obviously coordinates technology procurement, build and deployment across government as the technology department. But the Secretary of State for DCIT was very conscious that this particular project is one that will require a lot of cross-government coordination, because whilst they procure and build the tech, it's the departments that use it in what will be an integrated and interoperable way in the future. So she asked for us to formally support the deployment of that programme, which we've obviously agreed to do. So the Cabinet Office is responsible for strategy through the Cabinet Subcommittee on Digital and Technology. It will be responsible for the white paper and the consultation process and for the legislation that comes to the House. And then in time, responsible for coordinating the kind of onboarding of services from across government departments onto the gov.uk app or other means in the future.
That sounds like all of it.
No, so the Department for Technology will be engaging with technology providers, will be procuring technology, will be looking at how the system is built and operated and deployed across government. Just where there's policy coordination, that's where we play our role.
Okay, so it's implementation versus coordination and the strategy of such. Mm-hmm. So I guess the follow-up question, this doesn't signal digital capability moving back to the Cabinet Office more broadly. This is more about a delivery mechanism for the technology.
Exactly right.
Okay. Fairly straightforward.
Thank you. If only the delivery of digital IDs was as straightforward, life would be a doddle. Lauren.
Thank you, Chair. The technical consultation to clarify the details of the scheme was promised before the end of 2025. I think we're hearing that it's going to be pushed to the new year. Can you confirm that's the case and why the delay?
Yes, because I said so, because I wanted to make sure that we were consulting in a different way. I don't want this just to be a gov.uk web form. I want it to be a more engaging process with the public. Across the country, through MPs, through Parliament, with select committees, because I recognise that it's an issue that garners a lot of interest, and it's important that we engage on that and build the policy and the technology in a way that brings people with us and sees the opportunity of digitally led public services. So we needed a bit more time in order to build out those broader and more innovative ways of engaging with the public, which is what we'll be deploying next year.
Any particularly innovative new mechanisms to consult that you want to highlight today?
I don't know if I'm allowed to announce it yet. I've got to sign off some things.
You can do anything here. You're among friends. Go on.
Let me come back to you in the new year. I'm very excited, though, so hopefully you will be as well.
Okay. And then just finally, what's being consulted on, and when can we expect to see the results? Do you have a time frame in mind?
So we're hoping to be able to get going towards the back end of January. It is a genuine consultation. We haven't pre-decided what we want to do in a consulting just to manage legal risk. And so we want to make sure there's sufficient time to engage on the issues that people care about in terms of privacy and security and citizen control over their data and how it's used, but also the technical build and standards where we want to work with existing digital ID companies or the banking system and those types of things. We will need to legislate in some form in the second session, so we'll want to make sure that we go through that consultation process properly, have time to properly consider it, and then start to draft any legislation that we may need.
Thank you. Will it be the case that you are sort of allowing consultation on the broad principles for those people who might have concerns, or is it going to be more of a narrow, technical, how we do it kind of consultation?
It will be both. There'll be broad principles where the public may want to be involved in some of that kind of broader discussion about their current experience of public services, how it's not working, maybe with telephone hotlines or paper-based forms, or having to tell your story 5 times to different departments across government and local authorities, and what features they might like in relation to their banking app or their shopping app and how that might apply to public services in the future. But there will be a lot of interest in the technical build as well, both in terms of how the technology is built, how it's structured, where you put user data, how that's in the control of the user, how you protect it, how it can interact with other services. So depending on your level of interest, you'll be directed to different parts of the consultation to make sure that everybody gets the full opportunity to contribute.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify, before I ask Michelle Welsh to take up the questioning? You've just said in answer to a question to Miss Edwards about consultation, it would be both the sort of technical implementation but also on the principle. Mm-hmm. If public and stakeholder response to the principle is the country is not persuaded at this time, does when we introduce legislation, which was a definitive, that legislation is then not required, is it? If you're prepared to consult on the principle of it.
Uh-huh. Yes, I mean, look, I don't know what will be in the draft bill because, as I say, we've not consulted. So we'll need to.
But if the consultation says that we don't want to get into the weeds of whether we think this could improve management of immigration or access to health or how DWP works or access to whatever, in principle, we do not like this. We think this is the state going too far for the sensibilities of the UK population. If they say that very clearly, does the government then say, okay, we're not progressing? Or is it, we are progressing and all we want to do is just find out what the finessed detail should be, i.e. what this digital ID card should cover, rather than the principle of the thing?
Well, I think if you just step back and think, what actually is it that we're delivering? It's the ability to log in to a government app and prove who you are in order to get better access to certain services.
Yeah, I know, but that's not how the government kicked this off. It kicked off all of this several months ago by this was a key and important tool for the control of immigration through access to employment and housing, where there is already, Minister, as you know, legislation governing those things. When that didn't land particularly well, the narrative then moved on. Some might say, shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. The narrative then moved on to, but to the legitimate citizen, this is going to make life, a walk in the park. I'm not convinced people have bought that, because I don't think the government's done a particularly good job of trying to sell it, has it?
Sure. So a couple of things. The right to work check, which is already mandatory by law, which the Prime Minister's announced will have to be done digitally from 2029 if you're working and getting a new job. That is a application of the technology.
Yeah.
But the technology itself
And do more.
can do a whole host of other things in the future. It might make it easier for you to claim your entitlement to funded childcare. It may make it easier for you to engage with HMRC, those types of things. The technology enables the application of the digital right to work check, which we will do digitally, because digital checks of right to work allow for better enforcement of illegal work in the country. But the consultation will be on how do you build your ability to log in and prove who you are to a government app. How should that be structured? What type of things might you like to do on it or not? And the key thing, given that I've obviously read the transcript from the Westminster Hall debate recently on this issue, is that nothing about using the app to access public services beyond the requirement to digitally prove your right to work is mandatory. It'll be entirely up to you to decide if you'd rather call a department on the telephone at 8 a.m. in the morning or fill out a form and put it in the post, or whether you'd rather just open the app and do it for yourself in the same way you do for banking or shopping. The consumer experience of the private sector suggests to me that the public would rather have their public services be delivered as effectively as their banking and shopping services. So I'm very hopeful that the consultation will end up with a positive response that enables us to get on with the programme.
Hi. Hi. The OBR has identified that the implementation of digital ID cards will be a significant pressure on departmental spending limits in the spending review on 2025. As it stands, there's no specific funding identified. So will the Cabinet Office be funding this project solely from its own departmental spending limits?
The first thing to say is that the OBR number was an assumption they made based on what was available at the time on public information about what they thought the cost range might be. Government doesn't recognise that number because we've not consulted yet. So I can't tell you how much it's going to cost because I don't know what I'm paying for yet. That's why it's a genuine consultation. The things that we are paying for at this stage is the team of people we need to build and run the consultation and then to start to think about what we might procure in the future. That's being funded from Cabinet Office core budgets for staffing purposes. In the long run, the hope, of course, is that digital public services will unlock savings in other departments because they no longer have to run manual processes in the way that they currently do. And so the savings that come back to the Exchequer will be able to be offset against the cost of deploying the technology in the first place. But we won't know the precise number until we've come through the consultation and made some decisions about what it is we think we might want to buy in the future.
Do you know any number?
No, because it's a genuine consultation. We'll have to buy something, but the reason you couldn't put a number in the budget is because we've not consulted yet. There's a whole spectrum of options. I mean, you could go from trying to build a whole system yourself in government and totally replicating what the private sector's done in this space, or you could do something in partnership, or you could just rely entirely on the private sector. Each of those options have different opportunities or risks for the programme, and they all cost different things. But as I say, we're not coming into the consultation with predefined views about what the right answer is.
So my next question might be the same answer. Okay. So the Tony Blair Institute has estimated that a digital ID scheme would cost around 1 billion to establish, but the OBR has provisionally forecast it as 1.8 billion. Do you know why the scheme projected to the cost is nearly double that?
I don't know why. I don't know how TBI came up with that number. We'd have to ask them. As I say, the OBR was making some assumptions which they themselves recognise were a kind of broad kind of assumption just for the OBR's purposes. They rightly identified, to be clear, that it's something that's not fully formed yet, which is why they put it in their forecast for the future. But we will come back once we've figured out what we want to buy, because of course we also need spending authority from Parliament to do it. So when we bring legislation, it will have to set out what we think the spending authority is for the programme, and members of Parliament will get to vote on it.
Will the cost influence the end product? Because
It
at the
may do a
moment,
bit.
we have no, as a government, we have no idea how much this is going to cost.
Yes, and money
And
doesn't.
that's what we're saying.
yeah.
We have no idea how much digital ID is going to cost, which for people out there is quite difficult to understand and comprehend, because anybody else that manages a project, whether it's a building, whatever it is, has a roundabout figure, and sometimes it costs more and sometimes it costs less, and even if you change the plans, you kind of know the limit you're starting from, and actually what the minimum requirement really is to do the bog standard one, because this hasn't been done in other countries, of course.
Yes, and each country's done it in slightly different
Yeah.
ways, which is why the consultation is important. So, for example, it's highly unlikely, I suggest, that we end up following the Estonian model, which came out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's probably unlikely that we follow the Indian model, which is a very centralised biometric-led system. I doubt the public will want us to do that, so I doubt that we will do it. So we'll end up being able to scope the numbers more effectively next year. The one thing I would say is that in the spending review, we did give record settlements to government on digital transformation, including a multi-billion pound settlement to the Digital Centre of Government team in the technology department, which is doing great work on the passport office, on being able to log in and integrate other services. My assumption at this stage is we probably can piggyback off of some of that existing work and build a system that is secure and robust to the standards the public expect, but is not recreating the wheel or trying to launch an enormous multi-billion pound kind of decade-long IT project, which my personal view is not where you want to end up with this scheme.
So there has been no provision made for kind of the ongoing annual costs of running a digital ID system, which has been estimated at 0.6 billion. How is that cost going to be met?
So the commitment from the government is that the technology will be available from 2029. If I can make it happen quicker, I'd be very happy to do that, by the way, but our long stop date is 2029.
That without prejudging the outcome of the consultation.
For sure, because if it becomes becoming a huge complicated thing, it might take longer. If it becomes simple and streamlined and just about improving customer experience, which I think everybody would probably broadly welcome, you might be able to do it quicker. And if I can deliver a benefit to the public more quickly, I'd be very happy to do so. But the commitment the Prime Minister made was 2029. We've got another spending review before then. We've got a spending review in 2027. So 2026 is going to be a really important year, because we will consult scope and if we need to legislate, that will then enable us to have the firmed up numbers that can then go into the 2027 spending review process for those years in the future when it becomes available to be used.
Thank you.
Just before I bring in, can I just have a reality check on that? Scope, consult, analyse the consultation, produce legislation, all in the next calendar year, when we expect a King's speech in May?
Well, ideally, the legislation, depending on what we end up having to do, may have to go longer into the second session as opposed to the calendar year. But we won't know that until we know the depth and complexity of the bill.
Better.
Thank you, Chair. And just to go back onto the previous question in a bit more detail, it seemed to suggest that the cost wasn't really a factor or a decision in going forward or not. Doesn't seem that there's much of a cost-benefit analysis of whether to proceed. Is that the case?
Well, the minimum policy priority is digitising the right to work check. That's the only use case that's been committed to by the government. As they will consult on the technical route to doing that, but I don't anticipate that having to cost a huge amount of money to do. If though we want to do other things, and I'll give you, this is not government policy, but just to try to illustrate the point, I have many children. The childcare scheme is a nightmare. If you're trying to get a code from the council for a paper form to claim your entitlement for your nurseries funded 30 hours that you've got to sign physically once a quarter and maybe log on to the HMRC tax-free childcare system every 3 months to reprove your identity and every month process your own payment. I mean, it's maddening. If actually we can build a system that parents, if they choose to use it, you can just check your entitlement, log your nursery on and send the money to them, I think people will be very happy. But to get to that point, it's quite a complicated piece of government work that involves HMRC and DWP and councils. Those types of things will obviously cost money to build, onboard and deploy as a effective use case for digital public services. So until we've scoped what we think we can deliver beyond the mandatory digital right to work check, we won't know the cost of each of those, but that's the type of stuff we'll start to be able to crystallise next year.
I mean, I go through that process with my own accounting units on a regular basis. I would query whether and again, it doesn't feel like there is really a value for money bit of work being done, and whether the complexity and the ongoing costs of the digital ID scheme, and I understand the policy aim of digitising the right to work question for other missions, foundations and whatever, it will achieve, it's aimed to achieve some of those. I think I'd be concerned that there doesn't seem to be a go, no-go cost-benefit analysis that would then allow this scheme to not proceed if it wasn't delivering those benefits.
So I think, as I say, we've got to consult on how you build and deploy your ability to log in and prove who you are to the gov.uk app. The gov.uk app already exists. So the process for doing the logging in and proving who you are, from a technology perspective, I don't anticipate to be expensive. What I think will be expensive in the future are some of these complicated systems we have in the public sector that we want to digitise. The value for money assessment will have to be done against each of those, but my assumption, given the childcare example, is the productivity and customer experience improvements of being able to largely automate that process will be very beneficial and welcome to people. And there will be other examples of that across government.
Thank you. Right, let us turn to intergovernmental relations, and who better to deal with that? Mr. Richard.
As a former member of the Scottish Parliament, I'm very interested in intergovernmental relations. And so, Chancellor, having taken over as Minister for Intergovernmental Relations, what's your assessment of the current state of intergovernmental relations in the UK, and have you come across any early conclusions around where there might be need for change and improvements?
Well, so when we came into government, the Prime Minister was very clear that we needed to reset those relationships. They become very fractious under the last government. There wasn't any sense really of two governments working together to deliver for different parts of the United Kingdom. I think in the first week as Prime Minister, he travelled to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to meet with the First and Deputy First Ministers of the devolved governments to make that case. The government obviously established the Council of Nations and Regions to bring people together formally. And when I was Chief Secretary at the Treasury, I was responsible for managing that relationship with finance ministers. We'd inherited a situation where they didn't really talk to each other. Westminster decided what was on the agenda. The meetings were very short. There were no bilateral private conversations. The answer was often just no. We changed that in the Treasury and the Finance Interministerial. And now in my work supporting the Prime Minister with the First Ministers and Deputy First Ministers, we intend to take the same approach. The key point is that they are devolved governments responsible for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but in each of those areas there are two governments, their government and the UK government, and all of us have an objective to make sure that we're delivering on the public's expectations in the nations and the regions of England together.
And in the longer term, what role do you think intergovernmental relationships should play, and what should that look like? I mean, are you happy with the structures you have, the furniture that's in place now for those relationships, or do you think they should evolve?
I think the existing structures seem to work quite well in terms of a fairly frequent drumbeat of formal engagements, not just at First Minister and Deputy First Minister or Finance Minister level, but in other departments too. Obviously the Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland offices are engaged on a probably daily, weekly basis with the devolved governments as well, and there's lots of informal contacts between the formal meetings. Do I think that there's room for improvement? I mean, there always is. There are things, take Scotland for example, where in England we're able to make pretty radical improvement to NHS waiting lists. That's not been happening in Scotland. Could we share best practice? Could the government in Scotland take some examples from us about how to improve NHS performance? We think the answer is yes, but in some circumstances they don't wish to do so, and that's unfortunate.
Oh, that they would. But unfortunately to say that's a political decision by them. But what has been established, as well as those informal relationships, that kind of parity of esteem between Scottish government ministers and Welsh government ministers and the UK government. I mean, I think that's really important to develop that culture. I think that certainly helps joint working. But there is also a new set of intergovernmental relation structures which have been established. And it's very helpful to have also the dashboard which has been published, which shows what meetings are taking place. But that dashboard indicates that only 5% of intergovernmental relations meetings takes place within those review bodies, within that structure which has been established. So can I ask why they seem to be so infrequently used?
Well, I think the formal meetings are quite formally structured. It's quite difficult to get everyone's diaries aligned across all of the devolved governments and the UK government at the same time. They also, then there's a conversation about what's on the agenda for those particular meetings. But as I say, there's quite a lot of informal engagement, either bilaterally or on an issues-by-issues basis in between those formal meetings. And there'll be lots of times, for example, where we're meeting and we'll dial in the equivalent ministers from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to be part of a UK government-led discussion that's not a formal mechanism of intergovernmental relations, but is just two governments working together on a particular issue at the time.
So for non-intergovernmental relation review body meetings, the dashboard does provide a record of that meetings have taken place, which is obviously very positive, but then there's no record provided of what actually is being discussed. Do you think that is sufficiently transparent, and that allows for adequate scrutiny of the intergovernmental relations, or do you think that's somewhere an area where we could have greater transparency and more detail within the dashboard?
It's a good challenge. I mean, my sense is you do need a space where you can have private conversations to try to resolve often knotty or complicated issues. Often devolved governments are asking for things that we can't agree to, and that's okay, and we can kind of work through these things, and sometimes there are points of compromise, sometimes we can move a little bit but not all the way. From my experience over the past 18 months, there's always quite a long shopping list of things from devolved governments that they'd like from the UK government, and it's right that you create a private space in order to have that, so it doesn't become part of the kind of media cycle. If you didn't have the space for private conversations, I think it would make the working relationship harder, not easier.
And one important aspect of intergovernmental relations, but also interparliament relations, is the operation of the Sewell Convention and legislative consent motions. And there was a manifesto commitment made to strengthen the Sewell Conventions through a new memorandum of understanding. Can I ask what progress has been made on that so far?
There's been quite a few discussions about it. It's still not entirely resolved with the devolved governments. The principle, though, stands and is operated in practice, which is that where we need a legislative consent motion from the devolved government, we make sure that we engage them early in that process. It's called PBL, which is the Parliamentary Business Legislation, I don't know, is that right? Yes, committee, which I sat on for a year, always just called it PBL. It's flagged very frequently if there's an LCM requirement for any action that a department is bringing, and the team work together really well to make sure that engagement with the devolved governments happens. We're also very conscious we're going into a pre-election period soon.
Yes.
So departments have been asked to get ahead of themselves so that if they're anticipating the need for an LCM, that they kind of try to get that sorted before the pre-election period so we don't slow down legislation whilst the parties are off campaigning in their devolved government elections.
Thank you. I mean, I think we would value any information which can be provided on the details of any work that's taken has been carried out so far in that area around sewer conventions. But finally, can I ask if you might commit to providing notice to this committee of all ministerial IGR meetings so we can effectively monitor intergovernment relations activity, and also that when departments have these meetings within ministerial groups, if they might notify their corresponding select committee when these meetings are taking place. Is that something that the government would be able to facilitate?
I think for pre-planned meetings, we're very happy to give notice of those things through the dashboard or other means. Sometimes meetings can just happen in the day because an issue's come up and we've put it in, so we probably wouldn't be able to do it in that way. But for formal pre-planned meetings, I'm sure that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. No other colleague has caught my eye. Chancellor, Permanent Secretary, can I thank you both for your attendance this afternoon on behalf of the committee. Can I wish everybody here, our clerks who keep us well prepared and in order, to our friends from Hansard and the recording people, to our colleagues who have asked the questions, to our panel for answering them. Can I wish you all a very happy Christmas, prosperous New Year. And we will, in the words of Vera Lynn, meet again. Order, order.